Mike Byrne.
Tim, Quinn, how are you?
I'm very, very well. Musician and tailor, I believe.
Tailor, that's
Can we
how
go
I
right back to the
started out.
start? Yeah.
Can you believe, yeah. That's what I trained as when I left school, to be a tailor and outfitter, working in my dad's shop.
It was your dad.
It was my dad.
Was this a heavy hand guiding you in that direction rather than, or was this something you wanted to do?
I was already doing music. When I was 10 years old, quite amazingly, I had quite a tragic accident. I fell into a road, a coal lorry went over my hand, destroyed my left thumb completely.
Oh.
And while I was in hospital, my granddad gave me a mouth organ. And so I started learning this. And I was in hospital for about 7 different operations, and every one I went in, I took the mouth organ with me and was playing the mouth organ around the ward, driving everybody mad. But that was kind of a beginning of learning a musical instrument. But I also was always singing. In school, I was in the school choir, and at Christmas I used to go out and do a production of carol singing. I'd take 2 mates with me, and we'd do a production. We didn't just sing Jingle Bells, we did it in 3-part harmony.
So music was always that?
It's always been there, yeah.
What, was this through your family, through your parents? Or
Not through my mum and dad, no. But my granddad was in a concert party. And there was quite a big shop in Liverpool, Horn Brothers in the 50s and 60s.
Used to get my blazers there.
Well, and would you know that the Beatles went there and had their haircut?
I didn't
At
know
Horn
that.
Brothers, yes, it had a barber's shop. And so the Beatles, after Brian Epstein took them over, he sent them in there to have their haircut. Not that they needed it cutting that much, because they were in the Beatles style by then. Yeah, so my granddad, I think my music came from my granddad.
And he was working in horns.
He was working in horns.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mersey beat. When did you become aware that there was a sound in this city of ours?
I think the Mersey beat sound was a conglomeration of all the influences that were being felt in Liverpool at the time. So it was folk music, it was the sea music, it was sea shanties, it was country music, which was massive. It was blues as well. So it was rhythm and blues, and I think it was all those things that became the Mersey beat. And of course, 57, 58, you had skiffle. Lonnie Donegan had come back from New Orleans, picked up this music, which became very big for a very short time. Like 18 months, skiffle came and went. But it left a lot of guys all over the country learning to play the guitar, picking up a guitar and thinking, I can do that.
You were one of them?
I was one of them.
You put your mouth organ down?
Except with my hand.
Yeah,
I couldn't play the
that
guitar
work?
properly. I bluffed a lot.
Oh.
I bluffed a lot. But we had the skiffle club on a Friday night in an air raid shelter in Barring Park. So I used to go there. I used to sing along with all the old skiffle songs, Cumberland Gap, Rock Island Line, and but of course that developed then into me. I wanted my own band, so I got my mate over the road, Clive, played drums. He had a mate who he worked with who played guitar. So we got together and we became the Thunderbirds.
The Thunderbirds.
Thunderbirds, yeah. Not from the TV series.
This predates Jerry Anderson.
Predates that, yeah. So it was the Thunderbirds, and then we were playing at my school, St Eddie's College, and they had a coffee bar over the road, and so we went into the coffee bar and persuaded the guy who ran it to let us play there on a Friday night. And so we were pretty bad, really bad, and we played through one amplifier. So we had 2 guitars and my vocals going through one Selma True Voice amplifier, which is about 15 watt. So you can imagine the distortion that we had, but that's how we started. That's how we learned with Thunderbirds, and we went on, and we got better slowly. That was 1959-60. We kept getting better as we went along, and wanting to do more. I always wanted to do more because I'd been, I'd heard Elvis, Heartbreak Hotel. That was like a breakthrough thing, and I wanted to be Elvis, and You know, there's a photograph of me at Butlins, which you can see later. So there's a photograph of me with an Elvis haircut, you know. I'm at Butlins. I'm watching Rory Storm and the Hurricanes.
Oh, really?
And that's where I first met Rory. Rory became one of my real big heroes, because he was tall, blonde, good looking, good voice, very athletic, and what a showman on stage, you know. And they looked so sharp, you know, they were all in suits, but Rory could, you know, he could do the splits, he was just brilliant. So he was my early hero, 1960, seeing Rory Storm and Hurricanes at Butlins. And of course, they used to have, each week they'd have a talent competition, and the Rory Storm's band backed the act, you see. So my first song with a professional band was a whole lot of shaking going on, which I still
Rory
open
Storm?
my show with tonight. Yes,
Fantastic.
with Rory Storm and Hurricanes, yeah.
Other influences on you outside of Liverpool, American acts?
Well, it was Elvis.
It was Elvis,
It was
right?
Elvis,
Uh-huh.
and later Ray Charles.
Jerry Lee? There's a touch
No,
of Jerry Lee
yeah, well,
about...
I always loved Jerry Lee. I always loved that, and a whole lot of shaking going on was the song that I would get up and sing with any band who would let me, you know. So yeah, Jerry Lee, and Buddy Holly. So it was Elvis, Jerry Lee, and Buddy Holly who were my American influences.
Can you remember your first gig? Where you're up there, you're the front man?
Yeah, it was at the CI Club.
And what's the
Sanfield
audience?
Park.
What kind of audience did you
They were all teenagers from the local schools. So all the local schools to Sanfield Park would go to the CI on a Sunday night and watch us playing one week, and the alternative week was the Delrinas. The Delrinas played on the alternate. So we did alternate weeks, and it was just great, you know, because we were 16 years old. The girls and boys who came to see us, they were the same age.
They were receptive to what you were doing?
Oh yeah.
Were they tearing up the seats?
They weren't tearing seats. They definitely weren't screaming.
They weren't screaming.
They weren't screaming. But you know, you had a following, and of course you got girlfriends and things like that from it, and it was a good way to get girls.
How did you find the music scene in Liverpool then? Because looking back, reading through copies of Mersey Beat, you suddenly realise how many venues there are, not just in Liverpool but across the whole of Merseyside. When did this dawn on you that it was just so big? It was so massive.
Again, through Rory Storm,
Right.
because I got friendly with Rory, and so, if you like, I became a Rory Storm fan. You know, I was a fan of their band and Rory, and so I used to follow them round. And of course, Rory was a professional band. He'd been professional for 3 years. He got 6 months out of Rory got 6 months out of Butlins every year, you know, so he was professional. He'd come back to Liverpool. He could play anywhere. So I was following him over the water to the Grosvenor Ballroom in New Brighton. I was following to St Helens where he played. So I would be following him around, you know, and watching. And by following him around, you'd be going to these dance halls, maybe social clubs, maybe places like Reese's and the Co-op all had their own ballroom, which had bands on every week. So it wouldn't be just Rory on. So I'd go see Rory, but on the bill with Rory would be the Remo 4, the 4Js, who became the Foremost, a dozen bands, Jerry and the Pacemakers, the Searchers. So you would see all these bands, but then all the small bands like us, like the Thunderbirds, you know, whereas there might have been top 30 really good bands, as you can see in the Mersey Beat poll that came out later on, you see the top 30, but then there was the next 300 of us lesser bands, you know, who played probably 2 or 3 times a week because there were that many venues. You'd be playing not just, you know, I didn't get to play at the Cavern till probably late 1962, early 63. You know, because I wasn't good enough then. I was one of the lower bands. It wasn't until I joined I turned professional with them Grimbles that I was playing at better venues like the Iron Door, like the Cavern.
How did you get the better venues? I mean, did you have management? Did you have a manager, an agent, or were you selling yourself?
We were selling ourselves at that time.
How would you go about that?
You would just.
Was it you?
It was me.
You were the salesman.
It was me. I was the front man. I was the salesman. I was the man who wanted to make it happen for the band, you know, and I was the one who chased the band and made them rehearse, and
because that's a lot of competition. 300 bands. No matter how many venues there are, that's a lot of competition.
Oh, it is.
So yeah, how would you go about? How did you sell yourself?
Well, you actually went to the club, and we used to get cards printed. We'd have a card printed, so every band had a card. So it was, you know, the Thunderbirds, contact Mike Byrne on, I can't remember, Garston 123, you know, something like that. And you would hand your card out, or you'd have a publicity photo. And people would, through the CI Club, where we were semi-resident, then people would come and see us, and we would get bookings from that. Yeah.
You mentioned Rory Storm. What other bands really stood out for you on Merseyside at that time?
The Remo 4.
Tell us about the Remo 4.
Remo 4 were, they weren't pro at the time, but they were so popular. They were in the top 10 of popular bands, and because they had wonderful musicians in them. You know, Don Andrew was on bass, Colin Manley, a wonderful lead guitar, who went with the Swinging Blue Jeans later on. Colin unfortunately passed away about 10 years ago. He was rated by a lot of people, so I would watch them. They played, they were instrumental, a lot of instrumentals, you know, they could play anything, the Ventures, the Shadows, and Colin was a big fan of Chet Atkins, and he'd learned how to play Chet Atkins' picking style. So they were my other favourite band to go and watch.
You mentioned the Cavern and playing down the Cavern. Can you describe it? What was the Cavern like back in '62? You're walking up Matthew Street.
I'm walking down Matthew Street.
Sorry, down Matthew Street.
I'm walking down Matthew Street from my dad's shop. Yeah.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Where was your dad's shop?
Just around the corner, about 100. My dad's shop was 100 yards away from the Cavern. So the Cavern lunchtime sessions started in about 1961, 5 days a week. And so it was just a short walk around the corner, down Matthew Street, until you as you approached it, you heard a thud. You could hear a thud, a bass thud coming from the cellar. And you also were aware of the Cavern because of this kind of a fog coming from the doorway.
A fog?
A fog. And it was the Cavern's unique smell.
Can you scratch and sniff for us so that we can share
this amazing odor? was 5 ingredients. 5 ingredients. One was hot dogs, which they sold
right
for lunchtime. One was the toilets, which didn't have proper drainage. One was sweat. One was smoke, because you could smoke in the Cavern then. And the other smell was the detergent they put down to try and kill the other 4 smells. So they all mixed together and really made this unique fug.
It would stay with you?
It stayed on your clothes.
Very nice.
Wherever you went. Yeah. So when you came out the Cavern, anyone who passed you in the street would know you'd been to the Cavern.
You were a club member. Yes. Very good. How would you describe the Merseyside music scene from '62 going into '63, when suddenly people outside of Merseyside realised what was happening down here and descended upon the city? Were you conscious as a band member yourself what was going on?
Yeah, I was very conscious of something happening, something getting bigger. You'd had the Beatles, they'd come back, they'd been to Hamburg a few times, and one particular night that kind of made me go, wow. It was like it was like an awakening, if you like. They'd just come back from Hamburg the night before. They were playing on the They were playing on the Aintree Institute. We were supporting them at that time. It was 1962. No, sorry. We were supporting them at that time. It was 1961, sometime 1961. We'd been on, no one had listened to us, Mike and the Thunderbirds. And then the Beatles came on. And before at the Cavern, when you saw them, they always wore the black leather jackets, black t-shirts, but they wore jeans. This time they had the black leather trousers as well, which they'd bought from Hamburg. They got in Hamburg, so they were just. It was like the four magnificent men, and they just had a presence, and their attitude was just so strong on stage, and it was like a force hitting you in the chest when they started playing, and the whole place, the whole Aintree Institute was like crowded around the stage watching this powerhouse of music, but the image was so great as well. The attitude of Lennon, and the attitude of them all, and their voices were just brilliant, because they'd had a month playing every night, which made you very strong. Your voice was very strong. The musicianship was very tight. It was just great. And I remember, it's funny, it was like such an impression on me, I forgot to get my money off the promoter for my band. I think we were on £7, not each, for the whole band.
Okay. How many members in the band?
Four. Yeah, £7.
It's a long time ago. Yeah.
And mind you, the Beatles then would only be on, probably 20 quid.
Yeah.
20 quid,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
is big money for a
Yeah.
band in Liverpool. So the next day, I went to a lunchtime session. The Beatles were on the lunchtime session, and I'd got to know them a little bit by then. I knew Paul, to say hi and all that. He'd been into the shop a couple of times, and I was in the Grapes with them after the lunchtime session, and I was talking to Paul and Pete, I think it was. John was on another table talking to some mates, and I said to Paul, "Oh, it was great last night, and I forgot to get my money off Brian Kelly. He was the promoter." And John Lennon turned around and went, "That's the last you'll fucking see of that." Would you like me to rephrase that?
No, I love that.
Or shall I?
No, I shall happily beep you at some point if
yeah.
necessary, yes.
And that's what he turned around.
And lo, it came to pass.
Lo, it came to pass.
So he still owes you.
He still owes me. Yeah. So, going back to your question about being aware of something happening, that was not the start of it, but that was one of the highlights, if you like, that made you think something's going to happen in Liverpool, because by then you'd had Bill Harry with Mersey Beat doing the top 10, the top Mersey Beat top 10 or top 30, whatever it was, and so you had the top 10. The Beatles were the top by then. Rory Stone might be second, King Size Taylor would be there, Jerry and the Pacemakers, the Remo 4, the Searchers, and it went Lee Curtis and King Size Taylor, so you had that, and you had all these bands who were so powerful and had such a big following all around the Merseyside area. I mean, they weren't getting that far away from Merseyside. Rory was still going to Butlins every year. The Beatles and other bands were going to Hamburg. They were playing there. They weren't getting that much further, but they were getting bigger, and you kind of felt, God, there's going to be an explosion. It was like a volcano ready to erupt, and you think something's going to happen. And of course, that something that happened was Brian Epstein going to the Cavern on November the 9th, 1961, seeing the Beatles, and going, "I'm going to manage you boys." And you can imagine the lads in the office going, what are you going to do for us, Mr. Epstein? "I'm going to make you bigger than Elvis."
Yeah.
So that was the beginning of the Mersey Beat explosion.
But by 63, when it became obvious to people outside, people in London, what was happening, and the record companies descended on the pool again, was that something that you noticed, that you could see happening?
Oh, yes.
And when did it finish? When did that sort of, they descended like a flock, and then suddenly they'd gone?
Yeah.
But there was a period there where it was.
Well, it was like mayhem. I was in the band called Them Grimbles then. I turned pro with them, went to Germany with them. But that was 1964, so,
Right.
you know, I wasn't part of that. You know, I wasn't big enough for the record companies to go, oh yeah, we'll have you. No, but we were spectators to this, you know, me and the other 300 lesser bands. And you could see John Schroeder from Oriole Records. He came in with his mobile recording unit, took over the Rialto ballroom for a few days, maybe a week, you know, and brought in those other bands who hadn't been signed by major companies. So he brought them in and recorded them over a period of days, you know, and put those out as Mersey Beat album 1, Mersey Beat 2, you know, they came out like that. But before that, the other bands that got recorded, like the Searchers, the Mojos and all that, they were, if you think about some of the songs that they were putting out, they weren't all beat songs. You know, the Blue Jeans, after they'd done things like Good Golly Miss Molly, Hippie Hippie Shake, they put stuff like You're No Good out, and the slower songs, the Mojos, didn't do a typical Beatles song, and the Searchers were, you know, less beat and more on the harmonies. So there was they weren't all beat groups in Liverpool, you know, there was a vast array, you know, a variety of type of music.
It stuck with you. I mean, in 50 years, celebrating 50 years
yeah,
this year.
Plus.
Quite astonishing number. At one point during that time, you had a rather bright idea in connection with the Beatles. They'd come, they'd gone, they'd disbanded, and you're in Liverpool. And how did the idea come to you for the Beatles story?
Well,
because that was your doing, wasn't it?
That was my baby.
Yeah.
Well, I'd never left music. I'd always done music. After the 60s, I went into cabaret and theatre. In the 80s, I was going into promotion, but I was still singing, putting shows on. And at the end, in the 80s, my wife, Bernadette, became a Mersey guide, became a Beatle guide for the tourism board, and she was coming home from taking tours out, and she was saying, I was saying, where have you been today? She said, oh well, we've done, you know, Strawberry Fields, Penny Lane.
When did that start really? Because that wasn't happening in the 60s, was it? The tours weren't in place yet. When would you say that kind of kicked off, that interest? I guess it was after the Beatles had disbanded. It was.
Well, you had this this kind of lull, really, after the Beatles split up in 71, and they all went their own ways. You know, Paul was obviously wanting to get back out there again and became Wings, and the others did their solo projects. But as far as tourism went, I mean, Liverpool was in a pretty dire way then. The docks were in trouble. But then, I think the major thing was that John Lennon was assassinated in New York in 1980. And that was like a shockwave that went around the world. You know, how can a pop star be murdered? And then one of our beloved Beatles from Liverpool. And that's when people started, I think, to say, I'd like to go to Liverpool. I want to see where the Beatles came from. I want to see Penny Lane. I'd like to see Strawberry Fields, and I'd like to go down the Cavern, you know. And it was at that time that people started thinking about coming to Liverpool as tourists, or music tourists, music tourism, if you like. And I also, the other thing that I think that started off tourism, and it was a negative thing, but it began the regeneration of Liverpool, and that was the riots in 1981, the Toxteth riots. So John Lennon's murdered in 1980. We had the Toxteth riots in 1981, and that made the government go, can't have riots in our cities, we must do something about it. And Michael Heseltine came to Liverpool, and he came down, he looked at the docks, he looked at Liverpool. I'm going to regenerate the docks, I'm going to do the International Garden Festival. And those things, you know, along with John Lennon's murder was the beginning of tourism in Liverpool, and that's what kicked it off. So my wife, Byrne, becomes a guide in 82, 83. She's coming saying, hey, I've just had some Americans with me. There's Japanese walking around with their maps trying to find Penny Lane, Strawberry Fields, you know. And I, through her, got interested in tourism, and I became interested. And by a strange quirk of fate, I ended up as the events manager at the Garden Festival in 86. The International was 84, but it carried on. I'm the events manager. The boss of that company, Transworld, takes over Beetle City. I end up, at the end of 86, as the manager of Beetle City, the first Beatles exhibition, which has nothing to do with the Beatles story, by the way. So I'm sitting behind the desk in Beetle City with no customers, because nobody was going there. It was the wrong place, it was the wrong time, it was the wrong concept for tourism. And I'm wondering what to do, because it's failing. But a guy comes along and takes me to America, and we take Beetle City to Dallas, Texas. Again, what a weird place to go to, the Bible Belt, you know, where all the Beatles records have been burned and broken, you know. So we end up there, and we're there for 3 months. The interest was phenomenal. We had 40,000 visitors in this temporary exhibition in 3 months. I come back to Liverpool, say to the tourism board, what are we going to do about a Beatle exhibition in Liverpool? They didn't want to know. The tourism board wasn't interested in doing a Beatles exhibition, but I pushed and pushed, and I'm going, come on, we've got to do something. So I was given 1,500 quid to get rid of me, really. Go and do a feasibility study on a Beatle exhibition, which I did. And by the time I got to the end of this, halfway through this feasibility study, I said, tell you what, I'm going to do it myself. Went home to Bernadette and said, should we do it? She went, what? We've got no money, we've got no experience, how can we build an exhibition? But that's how it started. And so I went out and I got experts around me, and I went to every exhibition in the country to have a look how people did things. And what I had, the secret of the success of the Beatles story was the fact that I had seen the failure of Beetle City and what had gone wrong with that. That was all glass cases and memorabilia. There was no story, there was no interaction. And so what I did, I said, we're going to have an experience. The customers who come here, the Beatle fans, the tourists, they're going to have an experience. They're going to walk through Hamburg set, they're going to walk up Matthew Street, they're going to walk into our cavern. And of course the Albert Dock was the perfect place because it's all cavern shaped.
And you obviously had to sell this idea to the surviving Beatles at the time.
Yes.
How did you go about that?
That was a challenge.
Can
That was an amazing challenge, Tim, yes. Because we had this business plan, we had some very good plans drawn up by architects and some visuals, and I had to get to Neil Aspinall. And you know, getting to Neil Aspinall was like, you know, trying to get an audience with the Pope. Impossible, near impossible. So I wrote and made phone calls. I was ignored for a while, but then fortunately I got a call off Derek Taylor, which was Neil Aspinall's right-hand man at the time, and Derek kindly agreed to meet me. We had a clandestine meeting in the crypt of St. Martin's in the Field.
I've been there many times, yes.
Where I explained my vision and my dream and showed him the plans, and he must have been reasonably impressed, because I got a meeting with Neil Aspinall eventually, who said, I don't want you to do this. I said, why not, Neil? Liverpool needs it. I'm doing it for the right reasons. You know, I'm not a businessman. I'm a musician. I'm doing it for the right reasons. I want to do it for Beatle fans, for Liverpool, you know. I said, why do you want me to do it? He said, because if it fails, I'll get the blame.
Right.
I said, what do you mean you'll get the blame? He said, well, anything that goes wrong in Beatle world, I get the first call, no matter what it's linked to. So he said, if Beetle City fails, he said, I get all the newspapers onto me. Hello, did you know about the failure of Beatles? What went wrong with Beatles? nothing to do with me. But he said, I get all the flack, so I don't want you to do it. I said, well, I'm sorry, we're going to do it. Kind of like that.
Yeah.
And then I had another meeting with him, and he was fine about it. I said, can I have it in writing, Neil? And he said, no. So basically, he gave me a nod of approval. And so that's how we started the Beatles story 25 years ago this year. And on the boring side, the boring facts are we've had over 4 million visitors in 25 years, and it's generated 300 million quid for the Merseyside economy.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I'm guessing it's grown and grown and grown with the years,
It's
because the whole Beatles story, the Mersey Beat story, I like to think, has grown with it.
Yeah.
It's not going away, is it?
Yeah, it's not going away, and it wouldn't have started without that Mersey Beat phenomena that went on between 1960 and 62, 63.
Yeah.
If it hadn't been all those bands, what other city has 300 plus bands playing? None.
No. It's been up and down since then. The city's been up and down.
Yeah.
It's kind of on a high. That's my feeling out on the streets now, especially musically. What's your take on the music that's coming out of Liverpool today? I mean, you're part of the music coming out of Liverpool today.
Well, 10 years ago, we were saying, when we were doing, we were promoting Beatles story and things like that, and tourists coming around, I was going around to the hotels saying, we really need music in a venue. Or I was going down to Matthew Street and saying, there should be Beatle music being played every night of the week in Liverpool. And there wasn't 10, 20 years ago. Now you can go down and there is music played every night of the week, not just in the Cavern or the Cavern pub, but other venues as well. And the great thing is, when you talk to people who are in Liverpool as tourists, is they say, we can't believe this is absolutely amazing. And the other beautiful thing is that it's all compacted into a small area. So you can walk. You can walk from the waterfront right up to the town, into the clubs, into the restaurants, and you're going to hear good music all the time.
Good music. If you were growing up today, would you be picking up that guitar, picking up that mouth organ?
I'd be picking up
here in Liverpool.
Yeah, I'd be doing everything. Yeah, Liverpool. What a great place to learn.
Yeah.
All the universities encourage music. We've got LIPA. You've got courses everywhere for music.
Yeah.
What a great place to come and be. And it's only proved by how many students there are in Liverpool, and when they finish their courses, how many actually stay here and get jobs.
Yeah. What about you? The next year. You got gigs coming up?
I've got gigs every week. Yeah. I'm working around the country with a rock and roll band, the Sun Rockers, and
no time for tailoring.
No time for tailoring. I can still remember how to measure somebody up. Probably for a box now.
Mike, on that very happy note.
Yes, that happy note.
Thank you so much for your time. Great tales.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tim.